It is 9 o'clock. Good morning. Really great to have everyone. It's kind of, this is like this weird Christmas time, Advent time, where we are all very busy and trying to fit all the things in. So I'm really glad you are here. Today, we are talking about what I like to call whole life stewardship and ecologies of care, beyond time, talent, and treasures, and the idea of living in right relationship with self, neighbor, creation, and God. For those of you, I know most of you, but my name is Sarah. I am the Director of Giving and Economic Justice here at All Saints, and often I get referred to as, hi Maddie, as the money person, and I'm constantly, I'm grateful for that, but also constantly trying to kind of open up the idea that stewardship is more than just about finances and money. And so that is really a lot of what we're going to look at today, this idea of stewardship for our whole lives, and how we are tending to our individual lives, to our corporate lives, and how we are in relationship to creation and God. And so that is what we will be discussing today. And this is going to be slightly interactive. I'm going to be kind of talking about a few different concepts, but really asking you all to share a little bit, and so kind of get your reflecting hats on. And also, this is an opportunity as we're closing out the end of 2024 and starting to look at 2025, beginning to think about ways that you might want to kind of implement new practices or ways of thinking and engaging what it looks like to be in right relationship with self, neighbor, creation, and God. So, first, a question. What does stewardship mean to you? And because there's so few of you here, you're going to have to participate. Otherwise, it won't be as exciting. So, take a few seconds, few moments, and think about the term stewardship. And then the first person who's ready, raise your hand. And I'd like to hear just from a few of you, what does stewardship mean to you? Hi, Margie.
Okay. And taking care of others.
I feel like it's tending something. Like I think of a shepherd and their sheep. So it's not just like taking your trash out, or not like just a thing you have to do, but something you care about and you tend.
I think it comes for me from an awareness that we are here to hand this world on, and so it behooves us to just take care of it and do the best we can ethically as we struggle with that, and pass it on in better shape, hopefully, than we received it, which is right now a bit of a push, a bit of a stretch.
So the question is, what does stewardship mean to you? Others, okay.
I think of it as caring and tending, but in community, within community.
I feel like it also represents it's taking care of something that isn't like, it's knowing, having a disposition that what you have isn't really yours per se. You're taking care of it until you pass along. So, yeah.
Anyone else? Deb?
I think of it as sharing my abundance.
All right, anyone else?
Hello. I had to look the word up, and really concentrate on, but to me, it's sort of like waking up the community and get things going, more or less. I don't know. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of, find resources and stuff like that, and just like commit yourself, kind of.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Yeah, all of those are correct. You get 100%. No. So I'm going to share one definition of stewardship, but definitely everything that you all said, absolutely. Tending, thinking about the future, doing it in community, in relationship with others. Biblical stewardship is about relationship with God, God's people, and God's creation. The church, as we know it, exists to help us grow in these relationships. So part of the work of the church, so all that you shared about what stewardship is, the work of the church, the work that we do together, is about helping us to grow in how we are stewarding all of these relationships in the way that we understand that. So my next question, we're going to look at the concept of right relationship. And we're going to look at kind of three concepts: one, stewardship, right relationship, and then we'll talk a little bit about ecologies of care. So I want to ask now, what does it mean to you to live in right relationship or to be in right relationship? Does that concept hold anything for you? Does it make any sense, or is that something that's new to you? But does anyone want to share, if you have an understanding of right relationship, what does that mean?
To me, that means at a minimum, do not dominate. As much as possible, live in a relationship of equality and mutuality with other people and with the world, and own or manage or rule over only what you absolutely must.
Thank you. All right, anyone else?
So to me, it means being open and thinking about both the relationship with person or anything you're in relationship in a non-dualistic way. Like, instead of thinking either or, both and that openness means that you have a humility in your own sense of self, so that you are open to what they need, whoever you're working with.
Anyone else want to share any thoughts? Yeah, please.
I was actually, I've heard that a lot. I've heard right relationship a lot, the term. And I really don't know what it means. I mean, in superficial ways, it can mean like we're just getting along with people and treating them fairly. But right relationship it sounds like something that's really deeper and profound. And I'm like, to what extent can we have that in this world? And if you don't have right relationship, does that mean you don't have relationships at all? I mean, I struggle with what that means and how to implement.
Thank you. For me, there's a requirement of honest communication.
Anyone else? Okay. To your point, Maddie, too, and I think a lot of it, I see kind of on folks' faces just like, what is that? And I actually use this term a lot, but when I was trying to define it, I also thought, what does it mean? And it really is a kind of a broad concept. And I did a little digging and put together what for me was a definition that was really helpful, kind of pulling from different places. And what I came to was the idea of right relationship involves aligning one's life with divine presence, ethical teachings, and love for others, while fostering justice, compassion, and balance in both the spiritual and material aspects of life. And so this idea of kind of relatedness and right relationship, but recognizing that it draws from a foundation, right? And it draws from these expectations that we have of how what our values are. Oftentimes those values come from our religious or spiritual lives, whatever moral frameworks, whether we recognize what those are or not, how we relate to God or divine presence, and that opportunity for us to, and I love this term, like fostering justice, compassion, and balance. And I think all of what you shared is how we try to practice that, how we seek that out. And I think, Terry, you got to a very specific way that we can build right relationship by, having honest communication. And so thinking about, we were talking about stewardship, this sense of like tending and responsibility and responsible care. But how do we do that, and why do we do that? To be in right relationship, right? And this opportunity to build, really, you could say to build a better world, but to live in ways that reflect our values, that reflect our hopes, that reflect our spiritual lives. And so that idea of right relationship is helps to kind of like guide those practices. So then this idea of ecologies of care, and this is not a technical term. You can Google it and the world will create something for you. Especially I feel like now with like AI, you can like put anything in. It's like, this is what it is, and you probably should be like, is it? So ecologies of care, for me, is a term or a concept that I use a lot when I think about stewardship. And I think a lot about the passage in Matthew around consider the birds and the lilies of the field. This idea that they don't worry, that they're taken care of by God. And this is not a theological or biblical explanation. I'm not going to take it probably to the place that it was intended. But what it reminds me of and makes me think about, there was a moment when I was thinking about that passage, consider the birds of the field, consider the lilies, and how God looks after them. And if God even looks after the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, how much more would God look after you, oh human? And I was thinking about that, and for me, what came to mind is that the lilies of the field or the birds of the air are part of an ecosystem, right? And ecosystems are, the way God takes care of creation is there's these ecosystems that are created that are in relationship. There's all these things that are related to each other, caring for each other. And when those ecosystems are out of balance, that's when you start to see, dysfunction, like, animals, birds, flower. It's like, so I worked in agriculture, and when we are in farming, and especially when you're doing organic, sustainable farming, it is so important how you tend to the earth, how you care for the soil, how you water, how you are, providing for the birds too. Some of the things that often farmers do, because animals are going to come and they're going to want to eat, like, so say you're growing melons or something like that, like rats or raccoons and things can come into the field and start eating them. And so you try to provide kind of little offerings for them to take care of that. Sometimes you trap them, but that's another we'll talk about that at another time. But this idea of that ecosystems are really important to how we are able to care for one another. And so that's where this idea of ecologies of care come about, that, even in our in our personal lives and what we do with our neighbors, we are, and creation and God, that we have to create these ecosystems that help support each other. And so that's where that idea comes around, and it's interconnectedness, relational care, sustainability, and holistic practices. So we're going to start to go through looking at how are we living in right relationship with ourselves, with our neighbor, with creation, and with God, and kind of keeping in mind these concepts of interconnectedness, relational care, sustainability, and is this holistic? So thinking about self, as we are moving into this next year, it is just, in any year, it is so important that we are mindful of how we are caring for ourselves, because when we are in right relationship with ourselves, it allows us to be in better relationship with others, and with the divine, and with all of creation. Areas of being in right relationship with ourselves, and I will also invite you to share some that you have experienced, is so one is health and wellness. How are we thinking about our health and our wellness? This comes into practices around what we eat, how we exercise, recognizing, if you have, for me last year, I got really, really sick. And just, it changed my whole world, right? And recognizing sometimes we don't have control over what that looks like, but it's not this idea of perfection, but the idea of trying to pursue just a sense of wellness in whatever that means for you in your context. Another way of caring for the self is care of the spirit. Understanding, knowing yourself, understanding, I think this is where therapy comes in, as well as journaling, reflections, understanding how you operate, understanding what you need emotionally and spiritually to be in right relationship with yourself. Finances. Oftentimes, of course, when we can struggle financially, that takes a really huge toll. And of course, everyone comes into financial well-being in a different way. But it's one of those things that we can nurture and think about. And I might at some point ask if you have ways that you, care, whether that's, budgeting or thinking about, generosity is also one of those, right? We talk about being able to share and give, financially also, it creates kind of it has a spiritual impact on the self, but also making sure that you are, your family, feel sustained, and these are not things that we can do on our own. These are things that actually do require being in community, and oftentimes in our society, we are so atomized and individualized that it can feel isolating. And so I think when we think about how does the church nurture and sustain this work, it's how can we care for one another too in these areas. Another is Sabbath, taking rest, right? And you hear that come up a lot here. Make sure to take time off, take your Sabbath, but it's really important, and it's hard to do actually. And it's not just taking a day off. It's this idea of how are you kind of replenishing and doing things that build your spirit up, as well as then finally gratitude and humility. The importance of being able to hold gratitude, and I think what we talked about at another session I've done about, having a gratitude journal, and how are we oriented not just towards ourselves, but focusing that out towards gratitude towards others, and then this sense of humility of understanding ourselves in right relationship to the bigger picture. So let's take a moment, and actually I'm going to pass around for those of you who just came in some cards and a pen, and I want you to take some time to reflect on different ways you seek to express care to yourself. What areas in your life would you like to nurture in the coming year, and how might caring for yourself and stewarding your personal or familial well-being help you grow in your relationship with God and others? So take a few moments to respond to some of these questions, and then we will have a brief time just to hear some responses. You will hang on to these cards, and this is something for you to hold on to for yourself. So yeah, just take a few moments reflecting on different ways you seek to express care to yourself. What areas of your life would you like to nurture in the coming year? How might caring for yourself and stewarding your personal familial well-being help you grow in your relationship with God and others? I'm going to give you one more minute, and then actually what I think I'm going to do is just move on to the next section, and then at the end we'll do kind of more corporate sharing. All right. So again, looking at being in right relationship with self, and now we're going to talk about what does it look like to be in right relationship with our neighbor. And so just bringing the concepts of love and service. What does it look like to express love and service to our neighbor? One of the questions on the next slide that I'll invite you to think about is, who is our neighbor, right? And so thinking a little bit about what does neighbor look like, that could be a stranger. It could be a family member. It could literally be your neighbor. It could be a church member. But in expressing practices of love and service, what does that look like? Being in right relationship by showing justice, what does that look like? Compassion and forgiveness. I think a lot of what we do here at All Saints really leans into that, looking at what does justice look like for our neighbor when we are looking at the action table, compassion, the work with the food ministry here, forgiveness. When we experience hurt and harm with one another, how do we express forgiveness? And what does right relationship look like when it feels like relationships have been breached or hurt? And then also building community. How do we build community with people who are similar to us, but also what does community look like with people who do not, share the same way we seek to build community, and what does it mean to be in community with those who are, different? Mutuality. How the idea of mutuality is the sense of shared vulnerability, shared honesty. How do we build right relationship by being open and being able to give and receive also, because being in right relationship is not just about either always being on the giving end or always being on the receiving end, but being able to do that. And then unity. And one of my favorite definitions of unity that I've heard in the last year is not all about the same belief. Unity isn't about all believing the same thing. It's about everyone working together for a shared goal and finding unity in that goal, which means that there's compromise sometimes, but the practice of unity is about building alignment with one another within our difference. So take a few minutes thinking about your relationships with others, family, friends, and even strangers. Who is your neighbor right now? Who are the neighbors that you would like to think a little bit about? How can you show love, justice, and compassion? Are there areas in your life with others where forgiveness or reconciliation is needed? So take a few minutes. You can choose one of those or any of those just to reflect. And of course, these are questions you can take with you into the week to be thinking about. We'll take a few minutes there. We'll do one more minute. All right. So moving on to the next area, looking at what does it mean to be in right relationship with creation, the environment. This is an opportunity to look at personal and individual practices. I think often we hear about, recycling, which, more or less, I don't know how successful that is, but that's an idea of an individual practice. One in particular would be like composting right now, and I think looking at personal and individual practices, but also corporate, communal, like things that if a lot of us do a little, that can really make a difference. And I think composting is one of those. And that's because one of the things that we're learning is food waste is one of the biggest contributors to, I think, methane into the atmosphere. And so actually we would have a much bigger impact on our, we would reduce our collective impact on the ozone if we were able to manage our food waste better. And we could get into, we could talk, we will at some point have a session about that. So also looking at corporate, communal, and systemic practices, how does advocacy help us be in right relationship with creation and the environment? Awe and wonder. I think often when we think about, issues around climate change, around the environment, we think a lot about things like recycling or advocacy. But some of you I know here recognize that sense of also understanding the beauty of this world that's been created. And I spoke in a previous session a book by Bill McKibben on the that he wrote. He's a United Methodist, but also a environmentalist, and he wrote kind of a book, a commentary on Job, and talked about how the story of Job actually invites us into awe and wonder, as well as humility, when God's like, where were you when I created the world? Where were you when I created the Leviathan, this like massive, whatever, who knows what a Leviathan is, right? But it's the sense of like, that he believes that like awe and wonder actually helps us become humble. And when we enter into humility, it changes how we are in relationship with creation, and in that desire to care in a way that we can. And so sometimes, I think creation, climate change can feel so overwhelming. But in many ways, one of the most important things we can do is to love it and to have awe and wonder for this created world, and to find ways to do that. And that could be, taking a walk in your neighborhood. It could be going to the beach. It could be a lot of things. And then humility and resilience. And I spoke a little bit about how awe and wonder takes us into humility, but resilience, right? And that idea of recognizing that systems are always changing, and the idea of resilience is having the capacity to respond in the midst of change. And so we can also look at developing personal resilience, but specifically with creation care, how are we developing communities that are resilient? So consider your relationship with the environment. How do you engage in caring for creation? Where do you experience awe and wonder with creation? How might you nurture opportunities to care for creation in the coming year? I'm going to give this a shorter amount of time, just so that we are mindful about getting to church on time. So I am going to move us on to the next slide, and then we'll just have a little bit of opportunity to share. So finally, being in right relationship with God, divine presence, I invite you to think through what that means to you. Some concepts to think about are love and forgiveness, when we are seeking to be in right relationship with God or divine presence, how we understand that we are loved by that divine presence, and that how we are loved for who we are, and that we are created in the image of divine presence, in the image of God. What does that do for how we understand ourselves and how we then relate to God? The practices that we have to build that relationship. So, when we do practices of contemplation, meditation, yes, they are about how they change us, but they're also about how they help us relate to something that is bigger than ourselves. And so prayer and contemplation there are different ways that we practice that. That's something to begin thinking about. I know that here at All Saints, there are several people who want to continue to explore different ways that we do meditation, different ways that we do contemplative practices, both for ourselves, but also to be in relationship with God and a higher power. It's a very All Saints. I'm going to say all the words, and you choose which one you relate to the most. And then worship and sacraments, and our liturgies are developed they're developed to help us relate to God, right? To point us both to one another, but also to God. And so thinking about different practices of worship and the sacraments, and taking time to be mindful of those. So spend a moment reflecting on your own relationship with God. How do you experience and connect with divine presence? Are there practices or expressions you would like to explore and try on in the coming year? All right, and so to close, I'm actually going to ask folks to share, and I'll give a few, just a few different ways that you could consider sharing. But so this last thing, just to take with you, not to respond to, but this question about what are your guideposts? And I have this image right here. I was part of a church plant up in Ventura County. It was the farm that I worked on, but it was also a worshiping community. But we had these different areas that I considered guideposts. And I think we can have personal guideposts. For this community, it was soil and sacrament, so working in the field, but also participating in Eucharist, health and wellness, the importance of celebration and community. That was something that we always valued, and then word and study. And I'm not going to go into what those mean, but this idea of identifying things that are important to you, that you want to make sure are part of your life, and the work we've done around considering how to be in right relationship in all these different areas are part of helping us to develop guideposts that help us when hard things come up, when decisions come up, when life changes. What are the guideposts that we lean on to help us kind of direct our path? So let's take a few moments, and I know we're getting short on time, and I know Keith is probably going to have to jump out. But I would love to hear from you, one, of these areas, self, neighbor, God, and creation, which of those areas, one, do you feel like you connect with most in regards to what you want to nurture? And feel free to share something. Which feel harder to kind of think about or engage? Or if there's just any reflection you've had on this practice that you'd like to share, or anything that you want to let us know.
So I don't have actually a specific self or the different categories you said, but I thought, and I've been listening to a podcast with Father Greg Boyle being interviewed. Am I stealing what you were going to? Yeah. But it's this idea, and I love it because of you had in one of the slides you had mutuality was an important part of it. And he talks about how we can, if we go into the margins, and I would say that's true for just even among our friends and neighbors. If we go in with the goal of transforming other people, it's the wrong approach. The approach is to go in to be transformed. And I think that has implications for everything. And it has a lot to do with another slide where you said having that humility. So there's an interconnectedness with that just is transforming. So, yeah.
I'll kind of add to that. It was a great podcast. Do you remember who it was with? I mean, I'd really recommend it, but I can't think of the name now. But it was a light bulb moment where I heard Father Greg talking about, going out in community, kind of doing things that you think in some way you're changing the world. You want to make a difference, that sort of thing. And it's a great motivation, but you really have to go with this this vulnerability to be changed yourself. And because he gave an example of a woman at a symposium that was burned out, and she didn't see results from things, like in terms of statistics, or we didn't help X amount of people. And he was like, no, what about you? What about you? And all the people that were working together, were they transformed? So I love that. And I have loved this. This could have been like 2 or 3 hours, because I have so much stuff to go back to later. And the one word I would say to sum that up is the intention. You reminded me about all the intention behind these things. They just don't happen. Like for New Year's, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. No, the intention. So thank you for that.
Anyone else want to share if there's a practice or just an area that you're hoping to nurture in this next year before we bring this to a close?
I think we develop friendships by spending time with people, and I myself realize I don't spend that question about relationship to God, and I'm thinking, I don't spend any time, and that's something to think about.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and definitely keep the thoughts going. There's not enough time to dig into all of that, but there's all the time in the world for you to keep reflecting. So, yeah, thank you, and have a good church day.